So the objective of this class series is to give us the tools to educate those around us on the issue of climate change and to inspire hope and action and to shift the demands of the climate movement to the left. We should engage in the struggles for reforms under capitalism while building the movement for socialism. But without the transformation of society away from the endless growth capitalist model, we cannot overcome the climate crisis. Today's class will focus on how socialism is the path forward and what's being done by socialist governments to address climate change and sustainability. And I'll also give an overview of the major forces in the climate movement, and then we'll have a few comrades present on the issues they're facing in their communities for discussion. And for the comrades the 5 comrades that I reached out to about presenting, we'll make you presenters at the end when we're asking you to speak. So just hold on till the end. So next slide, Esteban. So what is a socialist planned economy and why is it necessary for our survival in the face of climate change? A socialist planned economy looks at what society needs, meaning how much food, how many homes, how many teachers and doctors, how much energy, etc., and allocates material resources and labor to meet those needs in an equitable manner with long-term sustainability in mind. Under socialism, major changes can happen very quickly versus the haphazard way that changes are made under the free market model, where resources are controlled by the ruling class and the government has little authority to enact major changes. Next slide. The comprehensive shifts in society that are necessary in the short time frame needed to avert complete catastrophe are not possible under the anarchic system of capitalism. The climate crisis can't be averted with piecemeal local projects implemented only by those who have the resources to do so. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't fight for reforms at the local level. We just need to also see the big picture and understand that it will take much more. Next slide. What is really needed is a massive restoration program for forests, wetlands, grasslands, and oceans. We need to build renewable energy infrastructure and build an efficient, expansive, zero-emission public transit system so individual car ownership isn't needed by everyone. And distribute energy-efficient appliances to all households, retrofit all buildings to reduce energy needs. We need to shift our food system to regenerative agriculture. We also need to eliminate all unnecessary and wasteful production and make things to last. We need a massive job training program in new fields to implement all these changes. And we need to look at what is needed for society nationally and also address what is needed regionally to address specific climate issues like extreme weather, droughts, sea level rise, and wildfires. We need to let Indigenous communities take the lead on best practices for environmental protections and restoration, and to learn from their ancestral knowledge of living in alignment with nature. And this can't be achieved under capitalism. Think about how long it takes just to get a road paved or affordable housing built in your community. And then compare that to the achievements within socialist societies or under socialist governments. Next slide. The failure of the capitalist system cannot be denied. We see how the most basic needs of people are neglected in boom times and in busts. Look at the lack of COVID response that has left over 500,000 dead in the US, by far the highest per capita death toll globally. And then compare that to the number of deaths in China, Cuba, and Vietnam. It's astounding. Reported deaths, next slide. Reported deaths in Texas from the extreme winter storms is now up to 80 and climbing. Officials say it could take months to determine the final death count. And now on top of it, people are being charged tens of thousands of dollars in utility fees due to the law of supply and demand. In times like these, we can clearly see how negligent and inhumane the system is. These deaths were largely preventable, and the government should be putting everything into climate change preparedness, adaptation, and mitigation efforts in the face of the looming crisis. But they do nothing to help people prepare. Next slide. In socialist Cuba, despite the increasingly frequent hurricanes, they have almost no deaths. The Center for International Policy, a research group based in Washington, said, quote, "A person is 15 times as likely to be killed by a hurricane in the United States as in Cuba." This is due to Cuba's very detailed preparedness plan that educates the population every step of the way as the storm approaches, makes sure everyone knows where to evacuate to, and immediately begins rebuilding after, leaving no one homeless. And they're able to achieve this all despite the US blockade, because the needs of the people come first. Next slide. China, Cuba, and the Soviet Union all lifted their populations out of poverty in a very short time frame and saw great achievements, even though these countries were overcoming underdevelopment and colonial plunder. The Soviet Union went from being the poorest country in Europe to doubling life expectancy within 50 years of the 1917 revolution, and was the only nation during the Great Depression to see economic growth. China and Russia today have a higher level of economic independence than for other formerly colonized countries due to the legacy of socialism. Next slide. Socialist Cuba has always had a focus on environmental conservation. They have a coral restoration program to restore the reef system that is damaged by increasingly intense hurricane seasons. Next slide. They were an early adopter of organic agriculture after the overthrow of the Soviet Union left them without the option of chemical fertilizers. They greatly reduced their energy consumption through the 2007 energy revolution that distributed rice cookers, pressure cookers, compact fluorescent bulbs, and energy efficient refrigerators to all households. Next slide. Within an 8-month period in 1961, illiteracy was overcome through a campaign that sent 100,000 young volunteers from ages 10 to 19 to the countryside to teach nearly 1 million Cubans how to read and write. This was in addition to 15,000 factory workers who held classes for illiterate coworkers after hours. China was plagued by floods and famines just 70 years ago, but through socialist planning, overcame extreme poverty imposed by colonialism in just a few decades to become the economic powerhouse we see today. Despite opening up to capitalist ownership, the country is still directed by the Communist Party, which is the reason for their ongoing achievements. China has made immense gains in sustainability, which you rarely hear about in the mainstream media. Next slide. Despite an 18-fold economic growth between 1980 and 2010, China had a 70% decline in energy intensity, with an additional reduction goal of 15% set in their 13th five-year plan. China is globally the largest producer of wind and solar energy, with an annual investment of $100 billion domestically and $32 billion internationally. China also has a program that subsidizes the cost of electric vehicles to fast-track adoption, making it much more affordable for their population than gas-powered cars. China is the largest producer of electric vehicles as well as electric buses, selling 92,000 buses in 2018 alone. Next slide. Biden's climate plan never even mentions building an electric-powered public transit system in the US, despite that the technology does exist. His plan purposely stays within the consumer market to maximize profits for the corporations. In 2014, China declared a war against pollution at their National People's Congress, and the government allocated $270 billion to reduce particulate matter pollution. The National Action Plan placed a ban on new coal-burning plants and accelerated the use of scrubbers and filters. It also prohibited large construction projects to prevent additional pollution from cement production and diesel trucks, and created a new environmental protection agency with far-reaching powers of enforcement. Between 2013 and 17, China reduced particulate matter levels by 35% in Beijing, with levels in the surrounding regions dropping by 25%. A 2019 UN report commended the Chinese efforts, stating that, quote, "no other city or region on the planet has achieved such a feat," unquote. The same year, Beijing was removed from the list of the world's top 200 worst polluted cities. I actually got to meet some of the Chinese EPA representatives when they came to visit the regulatory agency where I work. They came to learn from the agency, from what the agency here is implementing, in the San Francisco Bay Area, which by US standards is the most aggressive air quality and climate protection measures. But I think we have a great deal to learn from them as well. Next slide. China's Great Green Wall project that began in 1978 is expected to continue until 2050 and aims to plant around 88 million acres of forest in a wall stretching about 3,000 miles long and as wide as 900 miles in some places. Thousands of acres of moving dunes on the edge of the Gobi Desert have been stabilized, and the frequency of sandstorms nationwide fell by 1/5 between 2009 and 2014. But there are problems with the process, which I'm hoping they will overcome, such as their practice of only planting one species of tree, which doesn't build a biodiverse ecosystem that can effectively pull carbon from the atmosphere, increase water sources, and cool temperatures. Instead, they're planting non-native monoculture forests, which are much more vulnerable to disease and drain groundwater resources. But their efforts are greatly slowing desertification. Next slide. China's Belt and Road Initiative is the opposite of imperialist policies and has the greatest potential to make the world economy more integrated while addressing glaring infrastructure gaps, social inequity, and climate change. China includes the provision of aid and poverty reduction, agriculture, education, health, environmental protection, and other areas into the joint efforts to build the Belt and Road. Under the cooperation framework, it supports developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to invest more in infrastructure. Next slide. Venezuela's socialist government has built nearly 3 million homes since the Great Housing Project began in 2011, benefiting 12 million people who previously had inadequate housing. By 2025, they plan to construct another 2 million homes. I apologize, I can't look at the chat while I'm presenting, but maybe we can address some of the questions that are popping up in the later discussion. Next slide. Next slide, Esteban. Yeah, there you go. Bolivia under the socialist, go back one, sorry. It's a delayed shift. Okay, there we go. Bolivia under the socialist government of Evo Morales passed the Law of Mother Earth in 2010. Foreign Minister David Cochehuanca said Bolivia's traditional indigenous respect for Mother Earth was vital to prevent climate change. Quote, "Our grandparents taught us that we belong to a big family of plants and animals. We believe that everything on the planet forms part of a big family. We indigenous people can contribute to solving the energy, climate, food, and financial crises with our values," unquote. The legislation states that Mother Earth has the following rights: to life, to the diversity of life, to water, to clean air, to equilibrium, to restoration, and to pollution-free living. And it further outlines the obligations of the state and the people to these principles and rights as a binding societal duty. Next slide. Under socialism, the resources and ingenuity of humanity can be utilized collectively for the benefit of all of society and the planet. It is truly the only path out of the climate crisis and for the liberation of humanity. Under socialism, there can be true equality and equity in the challenges ahead and in the benefits of a new eco-socialist world. Capitalism always leaves the most vulnerable behind and ignores the needs of marginalized communities. Internationalism is crucial to solving the climate crisis. The problem is global, and we need global cooperation to solve it, to share resources and technologies rather than competition and imperialist policies that undermine sustainable development. Instead of corporations holding intellectual property rights, knowledge and research must be shared across borders with scientists and ecologists working cooperatively. Reparations must be paid to oppressed communities and the global South for centuries of colonial plunder and to resolve the disparities of sustainable development. Next slide. Wealthier countries hold the majority of the responsibility for causing climate change, as you can see in this slide. and today still have the highest per capita carbon footprint. And those countries must contribute more resources to solving the crisis. Okay, we'll see if I can pull this off. I've never chaired on Zoom before. So we're gonna ask some questions of you, and you can write your answers in the chat, and I'll read some of them aloud. Go to the next slide. So how does a socialist planned economy differ from the free market capitalist model? Oh, Andrew, are you back? Are you on?
I am. I'm having a little bit of trouble accessing my camera though, if we can.
Okay. People over profit can way more quickly make the changes necessary to save the environment, only produce what is needed, no crisis of overproduction. We create only what is needed instead of what the market decides. Socialist economy can change production on a dime to respond to crisis. Production of commodities is only for need and not for profit, which may reduce environmental degradation. Production is based on need. Main thing is no profit motive. Hi, comrade.
Hello. These are all really great answers. I see some other ones that say it's not focused on profit for individuals or shareholders, but for the benefit of a larger group of people. Invest resources in clean energy, even if there is no profit. We can end industries that we don't need with no regard for profit or their CEOs, like the fossil fuel industry. Following Indigenous leadership, emphasis on ecological peace instead of plunder, more care based on jobs. War of aggression destroys much of the earth, humanity, and fueled by oil and nuclear waste. Products made to last so there's less environmental damage.
I think a lot of those answers answered question 1 and 2, so maybe skip to the third question. So Esteban, skip ahead in the slides to the third one. Yeah.
Okay, and this one reads, why is internationalism necessary to solve the crisis? Okay, we have one that says, because climate crisis and pollution doesn't have borders. It affects everyone. We have to learn from people from all over the world, especially socialist experiments. System of production is global. Imperialism will continue to exploit other countries for resources to help underdeveloped countries develop without using environmentally harmful methods. It's impossible to lower the global climate without a global effort. Our shared water and food system.
Yeah, those are all good answers.
It says the West has contributed to the crisis, harming those in the global South. Again, sharing ecological knowledge. Eradicating unnecessary competition between countries that fuels climate change. This other one says reparations are essential to people whose lands have been destroyed, since the main pollution does not face consequences of climate change. Okay. Just because the Earth as a planet is a coherent life-sustaining system, not just one part of it.
Yep.
Right, not seeing any more answers there. I know it looks like we have a slide for general questions up next, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So any questions that comrades have on the first part of my presentation?
So I see one here, it says, what is meant by energy intensity on that slide referring to China's war on pollution?
So like more like energy efficiency, like how much energy, like less energy intensive processes for production, like reducing their energy needs, the production process.
Yeah, and now if people have other questions about the first part of Tina's presentation, they can feel free to type them into the chat and we'll try to address them. Yeah, if you maybe typed in a question before about 120, I would say type it in again. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. I'm not sure if people are still typing things in, but it looks like there might be another portion after a few more slides, so perhaps we can circle back.
Okay, yeah, we can always address any questions at the end as well. So next slide, Esteban. So I want to now briefly discuss the current climate movement and who the major players are and their politics. In general, the organizations leading the climate movement are liberal and have reformist demands, but I want to be clear that this does not mean we shouldn't engage and participate in their actions. Even though the organizations themselves don't call out capitalism as the problem or socialism as the path forward, there are people, particularly younger people, who attend these actions who do have an anti-capitalist perspective. And those are the people we want to connect with. Like other liberal-led movements, like the women's movement, we must engage and push the narrative to the left with our revolutionary perspective. Next slide. Oh no, leave there. Extinction Rebellion, Global Climate Strike, which is led by 350.org, the International Youth Climate Movement, and the Sunrise Movement are all reformists. They have different degrees of direct actions they take and different tactics, but in the end, they're liberal. They call for reforms under capitalism, like the Green New Deal and a shift off fossil fuels, but don't call out capitalism as the problem or socialism as the solution. Their demands are good, but just don't go far enough considering the urgency of the crisis. And despite that, even an increasing number of scientists are pointing out that capitalism is the problem. And this is a reflection of the liberal politics of the leadership, not necessarily the politics of those around them. Next slide. The most militant struggles that also have an anti-capitalist perspective are happening on tribal lands. Struggles in other frontline communities also tend to be more militant because they're literally fighting for their lives in these polluted neighborhoods. Indigenous communities globally are often on the front lines of fighting extractive industries because it often takes place on their lands, from deforestation to fracking, oil drilling, tar sands, and pipelines, and uranium mining and nuclear waste storage like Yucca Mountain. Early societies were communal, and still today, Indigenous communities are based on socialist principles and a sharing of resources. Tribal leaders are often the most self-sacrificing, giving away what they have to others in the tribe who need it most. Indigenous communities globally make clear connections between capitalism and climate change and promote a communal path forward to heal the planet and align with nature. Next slide. Indigenous people are 5% of the global population, with 80% of global biodiversity on their lands, and hold an ancestral knowledge of ecology, a cultural respect for the land and water, and a duty to protect. Next slide. And this slide shows how destructive pipelines are. I mean, these are just leaks between 2010 and 2020. And you can see all across the US. I think the Dakota Access Pipeline had 5 leaks within the first 6 months of operation. So it's constant. The Indigenous Environmental Network is an organization that connects tribal communities throughout North America who are fighting fossil fuels and polluting industries. They also connect with other frontline communities like people fighting toxic polluters in Cancer Alley, Louisiana. I want to show 2 short videos. The first is from a few years ago when the water protectors, the peak of that movement at Standing Rock. We're just going to show a few minutes of that, and there'll be a second video as well. So Stefan, I think we're going to switch to your YouTube page.
Actually, we can try refreshing the page. I inserted, well, we can play from here, but I inserted the second one.
Okay.
It's a project that IEN, Indigenous Environmental Network, put forth as a way to kind of classify all this mobilization and action that's happening across the map of resistance, of indigenous resistance, not necessarily just against fossil fuel, but against all forms of extractive development that's happening on or adjacent across indigenous territories. And you know, to capture that in the most direct sense of us, it's indigenous people rising and enacting their sovereign right and their self-determination, the right for them to self-determine what happens to their territories, to their bodies, to the air, to their languages, to their songs. It's all that whole holistic approach of us responding to a system that's predicated upon our oppression. And so, you know, so it's a project of IEN, but it's also just a general concept that's out there that resonates across indigeneity or across the diaspora of indigenous peoples. Of this is a critical moment we find ourselves on this planet, not just in the sense of for addressing climate change, but also a sense for social justice, a sense of just overall justice for all species. And indigenous peoples tend to be and rightfully are on the front line of those fights and those struggles. And that's encapsulated by this idea of us rising together.
All of our different traditions and cultural knowledge and traditional knowledge is all tied in some way or another to the land and to the water. And so, you know, our communities and just understanding of our relationship to the planet is one that is now becoming very, very apparent. You know, because Native people still work with the land and still have a very, very close connection to the land and need it for so many different aspects of culture. Like, you know, with my own culture, Anishinaabe people, wild rice is the most central piece to our identity. It's a sacred plant. And so if there's a pipeline that's starting to go through it and wipe that out, you're gonna know immediately. You're gonna know that the water is sick. You're gonna know that the river is sick, that the animals and the plants are not doing well. And yeah, it's tied to capitalism. Like, of course it is. I mean, it's something where we're looking at, I mean, you know, you're in, like, so for instance, this fight in Dakota Access, you're in a situation where the police and the governor and, you know, the National Guard and all these different federal folks are all looking you down and, you know, arming themselves against indigenous people that are praying for the land and for the water. And they're doing that because they're defending capitalism and they're defending profits and they're prioritizing profits over human beings. And so I think that, you know, the reason why we've seen indigenous people become at the forefront of this is because they always have been. They've always been there and always been knowing what the planet needs and being protectors and, you know, all those different things that require the perpetuation and survival of our own people. And now it's everyone. Now everyone's realizing, hey, you know what? We only have so much drinking water. The planet's not gonna, you know, just all of a sudden create new water. I mean, fresh water is a finite resource, and we're using it to extract, we're using it to frack, we're using it for all these awful projects that are killing the planet. And so I think people are seeing this, this beautiful encampment at Standing Rock. They're seeing these different efforts towards just transition, small-scale solar, wind. They're seeing that, Native people are also modern people. That, we're living in a modern era, but we're also still very, very tied to the earth. So I think that that'll continue, and we've got a whole lot of allies now that have shown up out in Standing Rock, which has been really, really powerful. And together, we're so, so much stronger.
Great, and then we'll just watch another short video, and then we can move to discussion a little bit. This one is the next one. Next slide. So this is a short video about current struggle in Minnesota against Line 3 and Sandpiper, a new pipeline.
What is Line 3? A lot of people want to know, and a lot of people don't know. So think of it this way. There are 6 really old pipelines that they put through in northern Minnesota, shipping diluted tar sands from Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin. And one of those lines is called Line 3. It has, according to Enbridge, about 900 structural anomalies in it. Structural anomalies are things like small little pinhole leaks, maybe some cracks, and some of those end up to be big problems, like that Kalamazoo spill. That was a structural anomaly. Line 3, it's old and it's corroding and it's at the end of its life. It's already had a number of leaks and spills, and frankly, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen. There is a likelihood that there is a whole bunch of contamination under the present line. And once that corrodes, our children and grandchildren may one day watch it drain a lake or a wetland or flood a farm field. Fixing these problems is very expensive, so Enbridge wants to abandon the pipeline, walk away, and build a brand new one in a brand new corridor. Enbridge calls this a replacement project. They're replacing Line 3. They are not replacing Line 3. They are putting in a whole new corridor and doubling the size of the line. That is not a replacement. That's a brand new line, and that's what's wrong. So we've got 2 problems. First, we've got a problem of the proposed new Sandpiper and Line 3 corridor through the heart of our best lakes and wild rice watersheds and through our treaty territories. We also have the problem of this old crumbling line that Enbridge wants to abandon. And right now, what abandonment means is that they just leave it and walk away. And the company says that they will take care of it, but it is not clear that there is any liability from the Enbridge Corporation. The worst part is that neither the United States government or the state of Minnesota has any plan to deal with it. The good news is that the Ojibwe tribes are standing up, and a lot of landowners, county commissioners, and mayors are getting increasingly concerned about who's going to be liable for Enbridge's mess. So tell Governor Dayton to tell the state legislator to tell county commissioners that abandonment is not what we want. We want big Canadian energy corporations to clean up their mess and not leave it for all of us. And we feel that they should put hard-working Minnesotans to work doing it. It's time to make a plan, investing in cleaning up and stabilizing our existing infrastructure and building stuff that actually serves people. Miigwech, this is Winona LeDuc.
So are there any questions on any of that last part I covered on the movement or the videos?
There was a question here that says, what has the collaboration on climate change been like between socialist countries like Cuba and Bolivia? I think that Gloria submitted a response that I'll read out loud if that's okay.
Yes.
It says, important to also be aware of how in some countries like Ecuador and Bolivia, certain indigenous leaders have waged struggle against the socialist government in the past, often supported by the US and the EU, and Amazon Watch has played a role in this. The indigenous candidate in Ecuador, recent elections, for instance, does not have a progressive stance. There is a class struggle also within the indigenous movement, but overall, I agree, indigenous people's consciousness being on the front line.
Yeah, absolutely true. Like we have to look at every protest movement and analyze it from a perspective of, you know, whose side are they really on, right? It's not every protest movement is good, right? Some are pro-capitalist. Are there any other questions?
Not seeing any other ones. I see a comment here about Biden and a recent confirmation hearing, which says during the confirmation hearing the other day with William Burns for the CIA director, one senator suggested we know China will lie about their climate change fighting goals and achievements. He basically said the US can't let up its pressure on China in order to coordinate on fighting climate change, basically ensuring the US won't do so at all. That's Biden's nominee for the CIA director. So this question is from Sunil. It says, wasn't Extinction Rebellion's leadership in support of the Bolivian coup related to lithium in Bolivia?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I know Extinction Rebellion definitely has some bad politics. But Sunil, I believe you.
We have a question from someone calling in on the phone. It looks like Elizabeth. If you want to ask your question. I'm not sure if we need to give access to do that. Okay, I think their question perhaps might have been answered. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat here.
Okay. So as we can all see, the working class is being impacted more and more every day by the unfolding climate crisis. This class series is meant to mobilize our party more on this issue, which is truly the biggest existential crisis humanity has ever faced. Future generations deserve our efforts. And I honestly do believe that we can reverse climate change and win socialism, as more and more people globally are seeing the need for a new path forward. We'll be posting the recordings of all 4 of these classes on Liberation School, so you can access any that you missed and share them with others inside and outside of the party. And I really hope that these classes are useful and inspiring, and that the information can arm us for the struggles ahead. Now we will have discussion with some of the comrades who submitted the homework assignment to see how we can and are engaging on these issues around the country. The homework was to bring an environmental climate issue in your area and discuss potential for organizing. We'll hear from 5 comrades, and we'll have about 10 minutes each for the presentation and discussion. The comrade who submitted it will give a brief overview, and then we'll have discussion. And I just want to say there were lots of great issues that comrades submitted for their homework, but we won't be able to get to all of them today. But I do hope that they get discussed with their local branch leadership as potentials for struggle. And I'm also available and happy to discuss them more one-on-one with y'all for the ones that we didn't get to. So, okay, great. So we're gonna move to Se-Hyun is gonna be the first presenter. And then the next one will be Tracy, just so you can get ready.
Great. Hi.
I'm gonna start with a slide. Sorry, can you go to the slide?
Is that
the next one? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Se-Hyun.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the slide says, Equitrans is planning to or actively working on constructing a pipeline over 300 miles, cutting through all sorts of valuable, at least personally valuable land to a lot of people who live there, a lot of nature, and also using the government to kick people out of their homes or out of their own personal land. This is happening throughout West Virginia and Virginia. Let's see. They've already been fined by state regulators for more than $2 million for repeated violations and doing different things. But if that's all that happens, they can just pay off those violations and continue to erode soil and do all sorts of harmful things to the environment. If it's it doesn't really stop them necessarily. Activists have been physically blocking construction efforts in many different ways. One successful method, which has delayed construction, has been protesters camping in trees. This has cost the company millions of dollars, and they've even used the police to try to force people out, threatening them with $500 fines per day being in those trees. But it seems like protesters have been able to hold a lot of land and stop them from construction indefinitely. And it seems like this kind of thing can be successful. There was the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which eventually resulted in the company canceling and reevaluating because of costs by protesters. So if anyone wants to look them up, Appalachians Against Pipelines or the Appalachian Youth Climate Coalition, you can find them on Facebook or other social media. They can, they could use either support or even people meeting up with them and seeing, what kind of things they might need, either for the people in trees or for all sorts of different efforts that they're working on. Yep.
Great, thank you. And comrades who are presenting, if you want to go on camera, that would be great. Are there questions in discussion, Andrew? Any questions about this or ideas or thoughts about how we could get more involved or any?
I see a question, but I don't know if it's related to this presentation. So I don't know if we want to address it after we hear from the presentations.
I'm curious, do we have any comrades close to where these actions are happening? I know it's probably in a very remote area of West Virginia and Virginia, but
Seeing there's a few comrades in the DC branch that are in West Virginia. Someone from Richmond is here.
okay, I guess if there's no other questions, we can move on to Tracy. And Tracy, if you can go on camera.
I'm trying to start my camera and it's saying I'm unable to start video.
Oh, Esteban, can you give her access?
There we go.
Hi, comrade.
Hi, Conrad. So I'm in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm in Western North Carolina. And one of our major problems right now is soil erosion into the rivers. We have a lot of rivers and streams. And so Western North Carolina has really bumped up tourism for the economy. We don't have a lot of factories. We don't have a lot of employment opportunities. So tourism is our big thing, right? So we have a lot of people coming in. There's a lot of new buildings. We don't have a lot of infrastructure to support that, in my opinion. There's always fighting over roads and where to actually place new buildings. And so there's been some new buildings along the Tuckasegee River, which has caused some problems with soil erosion. To the extent that we have so much sediment coming into the waterways that it's affecting aquatic life, it's affecting other buildings along the river. One house had to be condemned. So we're near a college, Western Carolina University, and there's a lot of student housing going up too. And so we actually, at one point, had a landslide related to this soil erosion problem, which prompted evacuation of a student housing center. And while Zimmer Development Corporations is the specific person listed most recently who's contributed to this problem, there have been some concerns about the fact that Western Carolina has this endowment fund for some of this building. And there's just a lot of concerns about how nobody seems to accept ownership or to be able to really enforce anything that has any problems that have been identified. So yeah, I mean, there are people who are concerned about this in the area. I'm not aware of there being a specific group in town. We're very small, so I don't know of a specific existing environmental group. The Canary Coalition was here multiple years ago, but I believe the man, he retired. I'm not even sure if he's still in this area at this point. The man who runs the local community garden is very concerned about this, and he had some ideas, and I talk with him ongoing, so I'll be in touch with him to see what additionally how we can support that. One of our local county commissioners said that she wanted to get involved in politics to deal with this issue, and then she said it's just too difficult. Now, we've also had some of that talk from her regarding our Confederate statue. So our definition of too difficult may be two different things. But I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Tracy. If anyone has questions for Tracy or comments?
Yeah, so one of our comrades probably on this call is connected with Western Carolina University. We do talk with the Answer Coalition at Western Carolina. We've talked about potentially doing some work around this, absolutely, with the community garden guy. I talk to him every week. I'm at the community garden all the time. It's just a matter of finding the right people, I think. But the community garden guy is definitely one of those right people, and then we can absolutely get the word out to the college and possibly potentially find the folks who were impacted by this slide who had to be evacuated and pull them in.
Are there any other questions popping up? Andrew, do you see any?
No, nothing in addition to that.
Okay. Tracy, unless you have any last words, I think we'll move to the next presenter. So next is Zach Norton. Go on camera if you can.
Hey, comrades, you can see me?
Yep. And, yeah, you're just fine. Perfect.
Excellent. First of all, thank you all for having me and allowing me to present this dire issue. So this issue, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm part of the Atlanta branch of PSL. And Georgia is, has many issues across many fronts, but on the environmental front, we have a huge issue of coal ash. And coal ash is basically the byproduct of burning coal. Now, there are obviously coal generation power plants happening all across the country, but it's a lot of it's focused on in the South, primarily because of the Appalachian mountain range and the way we can mine coal in the South and Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia. Georgia actually doesn't mine any coal, but what they do is they take the coal from those states up north and they basically import them to be burned. Obviously, we need to get rid of coal generation altogether, but what happens after we basically win the fight against coal, if you will, there's a really dark underbelly to what happens after that. So after you shut down coal plants, right, the problem is not over because you still have these massive pits of coal ash that are sitting in the earth next to these power plants from decades, hundreds of years of generating coal. So what happens with this coal ash is that after the utility companies burn the coal, they scoop the ash out of the boilers and they bury them in these pits. And these coal ash pits contain, I said hundreds of years of coal ash, which are full of toxic metals, heavy metals, toxins that are just not necessarily in the best interest of the an ecosystem and the communities that surround it, right? So what do we do with the coal ash once it's already in these pits? Well, historically, we've just done nothing with them. They've been sitting in these pits that have been unlined, which means that they're directly exposed to the earth below. And frankly, some of them don't even really get capped that well, which means they don't even really, once the pits are full, they're not even really protected from the earth, the air above us. So there's two issues here. One is that coal ash can be picked up by wind, right? You can inhale these fumes of the toxins, which is obviously a bad issue. And the more probably the darker, more sinister issue is the ability for the coal ash to leach into the groundwater below. So if you don't line these pits, right, like a swimming pool, you got to line the swimming pool in the earth. If you don't line these pits, the coal ash will basically get, it's a technical way, but the groundwater swells and it can actually enter these coal ash pits and basically sweep up those toxins and bring them into the groundwater below. And what ends up happening is people that live near these power plants, some of these people subsist off of groundwater wells for their drinking water, right? Those toxins are now in their drinking water. To put it on a macro scale, once you put these toxins from these coal ash ponds and pits into the groundwater, it's basically it's an end game scenario for a lot of communities. So you have a lot of communities in Georgia, rural Georgia, that they frankly don't even use their well water anymore, and they're relying on bottled water for every little necessity in their life. So long story short, coal ash ponds are located anywhere that you have power plants. I think it's almost every state in the United States, 43 states. And monitoring wells around these coal ash ponds have demonstrated that over 90% of the groundwater surrounding these coal ash ponds are contaminated. This is not an unusual and abnormal or an anomalous event. This is the norm. And the least we can do is line these pits. And frankly, let me take a step back. The least we can do is excavate these pits, move them away from waterways, which is mostly where power plants reside, right, on lakes and rivers. Excavate those pits, move them away from waterways, and then line new pits and then kind of quarantine them until, frankly, we have better technology to deal with these toxic coal ash pits.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, even when you do line them, oftentimes they leak because the industries don't keep them up safe. But it is a first step for sure. Andrew, do you want to read off any questions for Zach or any comments?
Yes, it looks like there's one that says, have there been previous successful campaigns to make companies like Georgia Power make themselves pay for ash cleanup?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the sinister part of it, right? So Georgia Power is a monopoly, right? It's a it's a publicly traded utility company, and it's owned and operated by Southern Company, which operates in most southern states. Georgia Power basically provides power for almost every Georgian in the state, and they are beholden to their shareholders, right? And not necessarily to the people. So there are instances in which, there are utility companies that are more, I guess, overseen and understand. Let me just speak about Georgia, but so Georgia Power is basically, they have been mandated by the EPA as of 2015 to close these coal ash ponds, right? They can't operate them anymore. the ones that are currently being used, and they need to do something with it. And frankly, this came out because there was a Dan River spill of coal ash in 2014, and there was a deadly Kingston, Tennessee coal ash spill in 2008. I urge you, comrades, to look into those spills. They're egregious and apocalyptic. But frankly, Georgia Power is to do something with these coal ash ponds. So they're basically submitting proposals to our Environmental Protection Division, which is their equivalent of EPA for the state of Georgia, by saying, hey, we want to cap some of these ponds, and we want to cap and line some other ponds. But some of these ponds, they're just not economically feasible to line them. So we're just going to leave them next to the rivers and lakes and just cap them, because just engineers have told us this is the best way to do it. Obviously, they're skirting they're trying to do the cheapest route possible, and we need to hold them accountable. And so there are other states that have kind of won these smaller battles. Virginia and North Carolina, specifically North Carolina, I think has made major kind of moves with their Environmental Protection Division. I think it's called the Department for Environmental Quality. Then they have kind of battled with Duke Energy, who's another egregious monopoly corporate empire, and they've won a lot of lawsuits, actually in the last probably 24 months, over getting their coal ash spills cleaned up. So we can look to some of those states to hopefully for some successful stories.
Mhm.
Looks like we have a couple more questions here. One is, are these pits considered targets for Superfund sites? That one's for Zach. And then for Tina, there's, what is the situation with funding, compliance, and enforcement of the Superfund sites? And then maybe we'll address those, and then I'll ask the second one afterwards.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Tina for some more clarification on this answer, but my understanding is with the Superfund site, so basically these coal ash ponds are primarily on Georgia Power's property. And as long as Georgia Power is operating these power plants and these facilities, I don't know if Superfund sites can be applicable for a private company to, while they're still operating. I could be wrong. Tina maybe has more information about that. But the reality is there are only 3 power plants left that are currently active in Georgia. And I think 2 of them are the largest coal generating power plants in the country. They're monstrous, and they're very there's some fascinating stories of community members fighting against these plants. If you want to look them up, one's called Plant Bowen, which is in Northwest Georgia, and there's one called Plant Scherer, SCHERER, which is in Joliet, Georgia, which has a lot of kind of media attention on it currently. There's some Vice documentaries out about it if you want to check those out. But I don't know about the Superfund site. I don't know if you can actually, make it a Superfund site if Georgia Power is actually actively using those power plants. Tina, do you have any answers?
Yeah, I think it has to be, post-operation and abandonment, basically. When the industry doesn't deal with it, then the government steps in. But there's never enough funding, and there's never really much action on it in any timely manner. But really, these companies, they write in these violation fines as part of their business costs. Like, it's cheaper for them to get fines from the local, environmental agencies than to actually clean up, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tina. I want to mention this one last part too. This is very important too. When the EPA made their first ever, frankly, a comment or decision on what to do with coal ash, right? Before 2015, coal ash was kind of just relegated to like state authorities. And the state authorities are basically bought and paid for by these utility companies like Georgia Power. But when they did make that decision in 2015 that you had to close down these coal ash ponds, they basically decided that we were not going to label coal ash as toxic waste or hazardous waste. Sorry, hazardous waste. If coal ash becomes labeled hazardous waste officially by the EPA, then we can actually make some more moves on coal ash. We can actually quarantine this and treat it almost like nuclear waste. But right now, because it's not hazardous waste, you can dump coal ash into landfills, and it's basically the same toxicity level as dumping like your banana peels and your baby diapers into your municipal trash bins. So clearly, we know that there's a difference between the toxicity of banana peels and coal ash.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like for the last question for this presentation, we have what actions are being taken by groups fighting against this?
So coal ash, again, is not just specifically an issue in Georgia, it's nationwide. I know specifically Sierra Club is been a big leader in educating folks on the issue of coal ash, as well as Earth Justice. Those two organizations are a huge asset to when it comes to trying to find more data from the coal industry as to where these contamination zones are happening, and holding them accountable legally, but also on the public scale, in the public media landscape. I think that organizations like Sierra Club and Earth Justice, only can go so far. I think that it is also responsibility of our cadre to help these communities at large, these neighboring communities. I mean, we all benefit from the power grid. We've seen these cataclysmic issues in Texas in the last few weeks, and how so many of us are connected to the power grid, and frankly, our waterways. You can live off the power grid if you want, but you can't live away from the water systems at large. So if your water is contaminated, we're all screwed. So I think it's there is a valuable place for our cadre to fit into this issue and help these communities on the ground fighting against these polluters and these capitalists who are not working out for the benefit of the people.
Agreed. Thank you, Zach. I think we'll move to the next presenter. We have two more. The next one is Ryan from Denver, and then we'll talk to Brant.
So
Stefan, you could put the slide up. Thank you.
thanks. So I just want to talk for a sec about Suncor Refinery. So Suncor is it's like a really large oil refinery. It's just north of Denver. A lot of people don't know just how close Suncor is to Denver. It borders to the south to like historically Latino neighborhoods called Globeville and Elyria, Swansea. And Suncor is actually one of the main culprits that has made those neighborhoods, that zip code, the most polluted zip code in the US. Suncor, it has a history of like massive, like quote, malfunctions. In just the last 5 years, there's been 108 malfunctions, like spewing toxic chemicals, pipeline leaks, mechanical failures, that are just spewing tons of carcinogens. And it was revealed like just in December that Suncor has been using outdated permits that they were using to justify even more severe pollution. Their permits got issued like between 2006 and 2012, and they were allowing like almost 900,000 tons of a year of heat trapping gases and also toxins that go down into those neighborhoods, like sulfur dioxide, benzene, hydrogen cyanide, really these poisons. And then of course, like during these malfunctions, the pollution like massively exceeds what the permits would even allow. And then so just a little bit about Suncor. So it's a Canadian-owned refinery. They have $90 billion in assets, but they're actually currently laying off workers right now. They're certainly like a culprit here, but the state of Colorado is also to blame. they're the ones, that like, allowed Suncor to be using these permits that they shouldn't have been. And, they've allowed Suncor to stay open despite these like massive failures, huge pollution scandals over the years. The state of Colorado called them operational hiccups at one point. And so, I mean, really what this is the state of Colorado is showing us through their actions that this oil and gas company, the oil and gas industry is way more important to the state than the residents, specifically these Latino residents in Globeville and Elyria, Swansea. The demand is really to shut down Suncor and organizing against it. So really at the forefront of that are the residents of these neighborhoods. They're organizing against Suncor. That's certainly a central thing that they've organized around for years. But they're also, like, these communities are also organizing heavily around gentrification. They live these neighborhoods are like right next to the interstate, the I-70 that goes through Denver, and there was a massive expansion that is actually happening right now. But the communities were like really reinvigorated over that. They're also like fighting gentrification right now in their own neighborhoods. And there's a lot of like seasoned, serious organizers in these neighborhoods that we have worked with like over these issues and want to work with more. But yeah, one of the main organizations is the coalition there, the neighborhood organization, and also like there's like a lot of North Metro Denver organizations.
Yeah, that's great. We have a lot of refineries here in the Bay Area too, and they often have what we call upsets, or just like, bringing toxic pollution in these neighborhoods. But in the end, like the fines that they get for these violations are like $100,000, a few $100,000 is just nothing compared to their annual profits, which are in the billions. So it's like, until you fine them and make it really hurt, like, or build protest movements that shut down their business, like, they're not going to do anything to prevent these upsets. Andrew, are there any comments, questions?
I was actually about to ask the same question to the participants watching. If you have any questions for Ryan, feel free to type them into the chat. I don't see any yet.
I also know there's comrades in Denver watching right now that know way more about this than me, so.
Speak up.
By any means, if there's more details that people want to drop into the chat, I think that would be welcomed by everyone watching.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see that we have a hand raised, but I think it might have been raised from the last section. So I'm going to maybe move to address it at the end of the course. That's okay. But yeah, no questions are appearing for this. Perhaps you did a very good job explaining it and everyone is clear.
Thanks, comrades.
Thank you. And so we'll move on to our last presenter, Brandon from Houston. Hi, comrade.
Hey there. Yeah, so from Houston, so I'm sure everyone can imagine what I'm going to talk about, which is the absolute failure of our power system here last week, which started on about Monday, 2 a.m. And lasted for some people. For me, it lasted until Wednesday evening. For some people, it lasted past that, and some people still are without power now in the state. On top of that, there's also people without water because of the lack of electricity led to pipes being frozen, bursting. Lots of the houses, at least here in Houston, are not built to withstand cold temperatures. I know where I live probably got down to about 30 degrees inside without power. And I know it was worse for a lot of other people. So But yeah, so for those that don't know, ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is in charge of ensuring reliability for the state of Texas. And that includes basically making sure that in times of high demand that people are actually able to get their electricity. They also manage the like wholesale market, which some people may have heard that people were getting thousands of dollars in energy bills after this because they were part of a company that uses wholesale prices for their energy. So people would get, $10,000 bills for their energy consumption after the fact. But yeah, we've had, a lot of people die from this, and we still don't actually know the full count because we have a lot of, houseless comrades that we don't know how they fared. Because at least in Houston, a lot of warming shelters were opened up that then lost power and closed down. And people were basically told, all right, well, we've got this other place. Hopefully you can get there before it fills up too. And after the fact, there's been, I know there was a hearing on it already in which the CEO of ERCOT said that they would not have done anything differently than what they did in this instance, because I don't know if they're trying to make people feel better about it or what, but they are saying, we were minutes or seconds away from losing power for months and not for days in the state of Texas, because we are not part of the national electric grid because of deregulation in the state of Texas that basically handed all the power over to the energy companies. So currently, actually right now, PSL branches in Texas are hosting a protest at ERCOT in Austin to demand that ERCOT is handed over to public control. Currently, it's all energy people on there, all non-renewable energy people. And I believe that there's one person that's supposed to be a community advocate that Governor Abbott appointed, which of course is also pro-energy, or pro-fossil fuel. So there's no one really advocating for the people. They're also demanding for, all renewable energy. For anyone that was watching, Abbott thought it was a good idea to go on Fox News and say that it was all wind turbines' fault. I'm originally from Iowa, where while this was happening, it was -30 in my hometown in Iowa, and our wind turbines were working perfectly fine. So it is not because of renewables. And on top of that, the deregulation has prevented the wind turbines that we do have from being weatherized. But not just that, also all of the nuclear, fossil fuels, natural gas, everything like that. Natural gas was slowing down and the pipes was not able to be used the entire time because of the cold, because of the deregulation. They were never forced to weatherize for these events. So, so that's kind of a brief rundown. This is all happened fairly recently. So, it's starting with this protest, but it's going to continue to grow from there. Definitely.
It's great. Great to hear the comrades are out protesting too. It's important.
Okay. At this time, if people have any questions for Brandon, they can drop them in the chat. And if you have any questions about perhaps anything else, you can drop that in the chat this time as well. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions for, spoke too soon. Has the government or energy companies said anything about how they're going to prevent this from happening again?
Yeah, that'd be great. So some ERCOT executives resigned, and outside of that, nothing really. Abbott's been demanding that, you know, the legislature does something about it. The lieutenant governor put it on his list of things to accomplish, but also on that list were, you know, restricting abortion rights and a bunch of other far right legislative priorities. So there's claims that they're going to do something about it, but at this time, no one's really done anything. The only thing that I have seen is that ERCOT kicked Griddy, which is the company that was selling energy at wholesale prices to consumers, off of the market so that people can't use them anymore, as like trying to solve the problem of people getting $10,000 energy bills for 1 month. But outside of that, you know, we've, as I said, the ERCOT CEO was out here, you know, this week saying they wouldn't have done anything differently.
There's one more question here. It says, who has the power to nationalize ERCOT? Is it the governor, and would it still be its own network just for Texas?
I believe that the legislature would have to do that in the state. It happened, I believe it was back in the way back when they started deregulating everything so that they wouldn't have to deal with federal regulation. So in order to actually get ERCOT into you know, public control, it would have to happen, I believe, through the legislature with the governor. And yeah, I believe that's the case right now.
And there's the protest in Austin that's happening right now.
I'm seeing if I see any Houston comrades in there. Oh yeah, I do. Okay.
Nice.
Looks like we have one more question. It says, what are the prospects for a larger struggle with the coalition and the people affected? Is it such a condemnation of the whole? It is such a condemnation of the whole system.
Yeah. I mean, I know we've got plans to continue this. We're doing as the Houston branch doing a forum to talk more about this, but then also getting out into the community to help out and work on you know, working with the people in the community. But you know, with this happening last week into this week, it's still kind of a moving process, but I know all of the chapters across the state are out there ready to work with the community and, you know, do what we can to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, comments? I just want to say it's so important. It's so great that the comrades in Texas are mobilizing on this, and it's so important, like, to organize when the moment is ripe, so to speak. Like when something like this, some climate impact or big environmental issue occurs, like to really mobilize immediately.
I think that's all the questions that we've seen submitted for this presenter.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. So that's all I have. We can wrap up. I don't know, Andrew, if you have any closing announcements or anything.
I don't have anything in particular. I would just like to thank everyone for joining for the series and for, you know, contributing to the discussions, and especially those who did the homework assignment and really looked into the sort of organizing opportunities in their cities or their communities around the environment. I want to just plug the book one last time. I would hope that throughout this series, people have either read the book for the first time or become more interested in reading it if they weren't previously. But certainly, if you haven't read it, it's a great one to read. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat right now. If comrades are interested in sort of having events around the book in their branch, they can get involved, or sort of they can reach out to their local point person so we can see if we can try to get Tina to sort of speak at that event. I think it's really important to spread this knowledge, especially now when the climate is sort of emphasizing the need to really overhaul the capitalist destruction of the environment. With that, I want to maybe see if Tina has any closing remarks before we close out officially?
Yeah, so I want to thank you all for joining and participating in this class. It's been really great, really good turnout. And yeah, I hope you share the, I'm not sure if we could, I was thinking maybe I could email the rest of the homework assignments out to the group just so everyone can see the other issues going on, because I think there were some other really great topics that comrades submitted. So maybe we could do that in the next few days. And then also, yeah, look for, I'm not sure when these will be up on Liberation News, probably, or Liberation School, the recordings of these classes, but I encourage you to watch them and, you know, if you missed any, and share them with others. Because I think it's a good resource for our party moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tina, for presenting and putting all of this content together for us. And everyone else, enjoy the rest of your Sunday.